If I handed you $20,000 right now, you would probably feel pretty secure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, by global standards, you have essentially made it to the economic finish line with that kind of money.
Right. It buys a lot of comfort, a lot of access, and, a lot of peace of mind. But what if I told you that the catch to taking that money was that you had to give up over a decade of your life?
Wow. Yeah, that immediately changes the calculus of what wealth actually means, because we're conditioned to believe that money and longevity are just fundamentally tied together.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And that is the core mystery of our deep dive into the sources today. We are looking at a data set that presents an absolute paradox for you, the listener, to visualize.
It really is a paradox.
So picture a stark white background. On the left, there's this heavy bag of money labeled with a 2023 gross national income of nearly $20,000. And on the right, imagine an hourglass, but the sand is running out way too fast.
That is exactly the reality of the data we're looking at. The specific numbers from this United Nations Development Program dataset, they really highlight the severity of this.
Because in 2023, the island nation of Nauru reached a per capita GNI that approached the global average, right?
Yes, exactly. The global average for GNI per capita was $20,327. And Nauru sits right behind that at $19,642.
So near parity. They are right there.
Right. But here's the catch. The global life expectancy is 73.4 years, while Nauru's life expectancy is a mere 62.1 years.
Which is just a massive gap. So the question we have to answer today is why? Why does an income level that nearly matches the global average come with a lifespan that is cut short by over 11 years?
It's a vital question.
Like, does economic growth automatically equal human progress? Or are we just looking at the wrong numbers?
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to pierce through this illusion of prosperity.
And to do that, we are going to analyze a really comprehensive data set spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023. But to truly understand this paradox, we can't just look at total wealth.
Right, because total wealth is just a blunt instrument. It tells you the size of the economy, but it tells you absolutely nothing about the actual human beings living inside it.
Exactly. So we have to use a 5-pointed framework to evaluate human development. First, we have the HDI, or the Human Development Index, which is the baseline of health, education, and income.
Okay, that's the baseline. What's the second point?
Second is the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted HDI. That tells us how fairly that baseline development is actually distributed among the people.
Got it. So fairness is factored in.
Yes. Third is the GDI, the Gender Development Index, looking at disparities between men and women. Fourth is the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, which measures institutional and social barriers.
Right, the structural stuff holding people back.
And finally, the fifth point is the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, which calculates the environmental cost of all this growth.
That is a very robust framework.
It is. And while Nauru is a single isolated island, its data serves as a magnifying glass for a global question that you might face in your own community or business.
Oh, for sure. Like, what happens when the numbers look great on paper, but the human reality tells a completely different story?
Exactly. So let's start with the macro picture. The global HDI trends from 1990 to 2023.
Yeah, let's zoom out first. When you look at the sources, the story of humanity over the last 3 decades is actually pretty optimistic.
The trajectory is undeniably upward. In 1990, the global HDI baseline was 0.608. And by 2023, that global average had climbed to 0.756.
It's like watching humanity slowly, methodically walk up a very long flight of stairs.
Yeah.
Every decimal point is millions of people getting access to clean water or literacy programs.
That's a great way to picture it. But as we know, the stairs aren't perfectly smooth. The data shows a really fascinating pattern, a rare and sharp decline between 2019 and 2021.
Yeah, the global HDI dropped from 0.745 down to 0.742 in that period, which to a layperson might sound like nothing, just 0.003 of a point.
But in the context of an index that aggregates the entire global population, that is a statistical earthquake.
Right.
We call this a global challenge shock.
Because the HDI is designed to be deeply resilient, isn't it? It's supposed to weather minor recessions just fine.
Right. So when the aggregate actually drops, it shows how fragile development can be. Systemic stress literally reversed years of incremental progress in just 24 months.
But the data does show a rebound after that, right? We caught our balance on the stairs.
Yes, thankfully. We saw strong resilience in 2022 and 2023. The global HDI rebounded with an average annual growth of about 0.5%, bringing us to that new high of 0.756.
Okay, so the world was generally recovering and climbing. Let's bring Nauru back into this macro picture. Where do they sit on this global map?
Well, in 2023, Nauru scored an HDI of 0.703. That places them 130th out of the 203 countries and territories ranked globally.
So they're technically in the UN's median-high human development tier. But honestly, 130th place feels like a massive bottleneck when you look at their history.
It really is a stagnation. If you look back, they moved slightly from 134th in 2005 to 128th in 2021.
And then they just settled back at 130 in 2023.
Exactly. They sit firmly in that medium-high tier, but they've hit a really hard bottleneck. They are essentially treading water.
And this is where I really have to push back on the premise of the index itself. If Nauru is officially ranked as having medium-high development, but their people are dying a decade earlier than the rest of the world, is the HDI actually a flawed metric?
That is a very fair question to ask.
Does it blind us to human suffering? It feels like we're giving out a passing grade to a society facing a biological crisis.
What's fascinating here is that the HDI is a composite. It averages out three completely different things: money, schooling, and health.
Right.
So mathematically, an exceptionally high score in one area, like income, can artificially mask a catastrophic failure in another area, like health.
Oh, I see. It's like having a restaurant with 3 Michelin stars for its food, but the building is actively on fire.
That is a perfect analogy.
If you average the food quality and the safety rating, you get a medium-high score, but the customers are still in severe danger.
Exactly. And that is exactly what the data reveals next. Let's look at the illusion of wealth, the income dimension.
Yes, the big bag of money. Let's dive into that, because the dataset details the sheer volatility of Nauru's gross national income.
It is less of a stable asset and more of a financial roller coaster.
Right. Imagine your salary dropping to near poverty levels and then multiplying by almost 5 times over a decade. How do you even plan your life around that?
You really can't, and the data extremes here are staggering. In 2006, Nauru's per capita GNI hit a brutal low of $3,449.50.
Just under $3,500 a year. That is intense poverty.
But then, by 2023, it rocketed to a peak of $19,642.40.
That is an explosion of more than 4.6 times their 2006 low. That is wild. What is the why behind these massive swings?
This is the absolute hallmark of a small island developing state, or SIDES. They are highly dependent on single resource extraction or external revenue.
Right, because they don't have a diversified economy, they don't have a tech sector and an agriculture sector and manufacturing all balancing each other out.
Precisely. Historically, Nauru relied heavily on phosphate mining. So when you rely on a single export, your entire national budget is tied to the volatile whims of global commodities.
So when the market is hot, the treasury is overflowing. But when it crashes, the money just vanishes.
Exactly. And the consequence of this volatility is devastating. Because while the peak wealth is high, the volatility destroys the ability to build resilient long-term social infrastructure.
Yeah, you can't build a sustainable hospital system when your national budget behaves like a volatile tech stock.
You really can't. You need predictability to train doctors, buy equipment, and maintain facilities over decades. You can't do that on a boom and bust cycle.
So what does this all mean? If this roller coaster wealth isn't buying health, where is it showing up? What is propping up their HDI score?
The data points clearly to the classroom. Education is the anchor here. It is a real success story in the data set.
Yeah, let's shift to that, because the data shows Nauru is remarkably close to the global standard in education. The expected years of schooling in 2023 for Nauru is 12.8 years.
Which is nearly touching the global average of 13.0 years.
Right. And furthermore, Nauru's mean years of schooling, the actual time adults spent in school, is 9.4 years. That sits really nicely against global averages.
It shows that despite the economic chaos, they are keeping their youth in the educational system. It's a massive accumulation of social capital.
But we have to contrast this educational triumph with the grim health data. This is the core paradox. While global life expectancy rose steadily to 73.4 years, Nauru's life expectancy in 2023 is a staggering 62.1 years.
It's tragic. It is lower than the global average was way back in 1990.
I want you to just visualize a chart where the global line goes up, while Nauru's line sits far below. It's a massive 11.3-year gap.
11 years is an eternity. It represents millions of lost years of human life across their population.
And normally, Education and health go hand in hand, right? If you have an educated populace, they usually make better health choices and build better systems.
That is the standard development model, yes.
So why is Nauru's education acting like a life jacket that is fundamentally failing to keep the swimmer alive?
To understand that, we have to look at the concept of systemic health risks. What you're describing relies on the assumption that healthy choices are actually available to people.
Right. You can't choose a healthy option if there isn't one on the shelf.
Precisely. Education cannot outcompete a lack of foundational health infrastructure. And more importantly, it cannot outcompete severe nutritional deficits.
Which the data suggests are deeply ingrained in the island's reality. Let's zoom into that micro level using the multidimensional poverty index, the MPI.
The MPI is a great tool because it looks past just dollars and measures actual daily deprivations.
And Nauru's MPI incidence is only 6.8%, which sounds incredibly low. It sounds like they eradicated poverty.
It does sound like a victory at first glance, but you have to look at the intensity of that poverty.
Right. For those 6.8% experiencing it, the intensity is nearly 40%.
Yeah.
It's 39.8%. So it's incredibly deep, stubborn poverty.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. When we think of poverty, we usually think of no electricity or shelter.
Yeah. Dirt floors, no running water. But the data shows lack of electricity accounts for only 0.4% of Nauru's poverty. It's a non-issue.
The real culprits are startling. The highest contributors to poverty are a lack of nutrition at 32.5% and a lack of school attendance at 32.7%.
Wait, a third of their poverty is just a lack of nutrition. How does that happen on an island with a GNI of nearly $20,000?
This connects directly back to that GNI volatility we discussed. A high GNI doesn't mean fresh, nutritious food is accessible or affordable on an isolated island.
Let's talk about the logistics of that. Getting an apple to Nauru.
It requires complex, extensive cold chain shipping. By the time fresh produce arrives, the spoilage rate is high, and the cost to the consumer is exorbitant.
And historically, the phosphate mining destroyed a lot of the arable land, right? So they can't even grow their own food easily.
Exactly. So what do you eat? You rely on imported, highly processed, shelf-stable foods, canned meats, refined carbs, sugary drinks.
Stuff with high calories, but zero nutritional density. So the poverty here isn't a lack of power lines. It's a profound systemic failure of biological nourishment.
Which perfectly explains the 62.1-year life expectancy. A high GNI doesn't save your heart if you're running on processed imports for 40 years.
It's wild. Okay, let's shift to the equality surprise, the IHDI, or inequality-adjusted HDI.
Right. This metric asks how much development is lost when we account for inequality between the rich and poor within a country.
And globally, the world loses 21.96% of its human development due to inequality. Almost a quarter of human potential is just wiped out.
But Nauru, surprisingly, only loses 14.8%, dropping its score to 0.599.
Wait, so Nauru actually has a fairer, more equal distribution of its development than the global average. Is that a victory?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's really a double-edged sword. Nauru's issue is not heavily skewed, unfair distribution among its citizens.
So there isn't some massive billionaire class hoarding everything.
No, the problem is that the floor is simply too low. Equality doesn't mean much if everyone is equally lacking access to vital health and nutritional resources.
Right, it's like having a pie that is perfectly equally sliced for everyone, but the pie itself is made of sawdust. Everyone is treated equally, but everyone is still deeply malnourished.
Exactly. You would objectively rather be slightly unequal in a society where the poorest person lives to 80 than perfectly equal where everyone dies at 62.
That is a harsh reality check. Let's look at another dimension of equality, the gender scales. Let's look at the Gender Development Index, the GDI.
This measures parity in the baseline indices, and amazingly, Nauru's GDI is 0.955.
Which matches the global average exactly. It looks like an incredible triumph on the surface. And women actually live longer than men there, right?
Yes. Female life expectancy is 64.0 years, while for men, it's 60.3 years. But we have to look deeper. Look at the income gap.
Yeah, here is the first crack in the illusion. Women's per capita income is estimated at $15,192.
While men's income is drastically higher at $23,929.
That is a staggering disparity. To understand why that is, we need the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Right, the GII shows us the structural barriers, the actual reality check of power. In Nauru, women hold only 10.5% of political seats,
compared to a global average of 26.5%. And historically, the sources say Nauru was at 0% for years.
A complete lockout from the legislative process, and this directly impacts our next critical metric of social health. adolescent birth rates.
Yes, Nauru's adolescent birth rate is 76.2 per 1,000. That is almost double the global average of 39.1.
And this is where the 30-year historical contrast becomes crucial. Globally, the world has become wealthier and more disciplined over the last 3 decades.
Right, global adolescent birth rates dropped 47%, while global GNI grew 80%. But Nauru missed this social transition entirely.
They experienced the wealth explosion, but not the accompanying social maturation.
Because without women in political power to advocate for maternal health, nutrition, and youth programs, the high adolescent birth rate and the low life expectancy just become a self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly. It is structural disempowerment manifesting as a biological crisis.
Let's bring in the final dimension, the environmental balance sheet, or the PHDI, planetary pressures adjusted HDI.
This metric is vital because globally, human development comes at an environmental cost. It drops the global HDI by about 10% when adjusted for planetary impact.
And Nauru's carbon footprint is really interesting here. In 2023, both the global average and Nauru's per capita CO2 emissions sit exactly at 4.5 tons.
They are perfectly aligned with the global average today. But you have to look at the massive historical trend line.
Right, because in 1990, Nauru's emissions were a massive 12.9 tons, and it plummeted down to 4.5.
A huge drop.
So my question is, did Nauru suddenly become an eco-warrior champion of green energy? Or is this just what happens when traditional, heavy-polluting island industries completely collapse?
Remaining impartial and just looking at the data, it simply reflects a massive structural shift in the island's economy.
So the factory closed down.
Exactly. The extractive phosphate industry wound down. While it's a positive environmental outcome on paper, it aligns perfectly with the economic volatility we discussed earlier.
The greening is just an echo of the economic roller coaster. Okay, we've pulled apart all these threads. I want to ask you to bring them all together, synthesize the data for us.
This raises an important question. How does a nation break a deadlock like this? The data points to a triple dilemma.
Let's outline the triple dilemma. What is number one?
First, economic structural fragility. They have a high but volatile GNI that entirely lacks resilience.
Right. You can't build on shifting sand. What's number two?
Second, severe health shortfalls. The nutritional deficits and high mortality are actively wiping out the massive benefits of their strong education system.
An educated mind and a feeling body.
And the third dilemma.
Third, social participation imbalance. The long-term, systemic low political empowerment for women is severely hindering the development of crucial social policies.
So, reflecting on all of this, a major overarching theme emerges. A shift is fundamentally needed from what I would call digital prosperity, just looking at high GNI numbers on a screen, to life dignity.
The data strongly dictates that the future strategy cannot rely on economic growth alone. Raw financial growth will not save them.
So what is the strategy? How do they pivot?
It must pivot to multidimensional interventions. We're talking about aggressive, localized nutritional programs.
Right, bypassing those volatile import supply chains. Exactly. It also means total healthcare system reconstruction, focusing on preventative care, and fundamentally it requires political gender empowerment.
You have to bring the people who manage household health into the halls of power to write the budgets.
Precisely. You cannot buy life expectancy with a volatile paycheck.
I want to wrap up our deep dive today by speaking directly to you, the listener. The story of Nauru proves a really profound truth that is hidden in this dataset. The growth of a nation's wealth, its GNI, does not automatically translate to the extension of human life.
It really doesn't. A heavy bag of money cannot slow down the sand in the hourglass.
So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over. If an influx of raw cash doesn't guarantee a longer, healthier life, what unmeasured wealth in your own life might actually be the true driver of your longevity?
That is a great question to ask.
Think about it. Is it the deep community support in your neighborhood? Is it your access to safe, green spaces to walk in? Or maybe it's just the consistent quality of the fresh food in your local store. These unmeasured factors might be keeping you alive far more than your bank balance. The data is a beacon, illuminating the cracks in our systems. How will you let it change your perspective?